It is 1808, and the South China Sea is on fire. Not metaphorically, literally. Burning junks light up the horizon like lanterns at a funeral, their masts collapsing into the water with a hiss of steam and a shower of sparks. The Qing Imperial Navy, the naval arm of the largest empire on Earth, an empire of 300 million souls, has just been annihilated. 35 warships gone, sunk, captured, or scattered across the water in splinters. The survivors are fleeing upriver with the tide, their officers too stunned to give orders, their sailors throwing weapons overboard to make the boats lighter. And the fleet that did this? 1,800 war junks, 80,000 pirates, the largest armada of outlaws ever assembled in human history, is not pursuing them. It does not need to. The South China Sea now belongs to one person, a former prostitute from a floating brothel in Canton, a woman who could not read when she was 20. A woman who, at this moment, commands more ships than the Spanish Armada, more men than most European armies, and more territory than some European nations. Her name was Shi Shanggu. Her husband's clan would call her Zhang Yi Sao, wife of Zhang Yi. The Western world would come to know her as Ching Shih. And she was not merely the most powerful pirate who ever lived. She was the only one who won. In the next 20 minutes, you are going to learn three things. First, how a woman born into the lowest caste of Chinese society, a caste legally forbidden from living on land, negotiated 50% command of a pirate empire before she agreed to a marriage. Second, how she wrote a legal code so ruthlessly effective that her fleet of 80,000 outlaws operated with more discipline than the professional navies sent to destroy it. And third, how she engineered the single greatest exit in the history of crime, walking into a government office unarmed, dictating her own terms, and retiring to die wealthy, free, and old in her own bed. Something no other pirate in history has ever managed. This is the story of the woman who broke every rule and then rewrote them. But first, you need to understand where she came from. And where she came from was the very bottom of a world that had a lot of bottom to offer. The Pearl River Delta, Guangdong Province, southern China. The late 1700s. Picture it, not the China of emperors and jade palaces, but the other China, the wet, teeming, sweltering China of the southern coast, where the Pearl River sprawls into a labyrinth of channels and tributaries before emptying into the South China Sea. Canton, Guangzhou, sits at the heart of it, a city of over 1 million people, one of the largest and richest ports on the planet. This is where Europe meets Asia. The East India Company has its trading factories here. American merchants ship ginseng and furs up the river. Portuguese traders come from Macau, 60 miles downstream. The air smells of fish and joss sticks, coal smoke and sewage, ripe fruit, and the sweet, cloying tang of opium. The riverbanks are a wall of noise, porters hauling bales of silk, merchants screaming prices, coolies bent double under loads of tea destined for London drawing rooms, barbers shaving heads on sampans, duck farmers paddling between the hulls of ocean-going junks, fortune tellers and letter writers and thieves, all competing for the same square foot of waterfront. And on the river itself, stretching as far as the eye can see, the boats. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Sampans, junks, lighters, ferries, and houseboats packed so tightly that you could walk from one bank to the other without getting your feet wet, stepping from deck to deck across a floating city that never touched land. This was the world of the Tanka. If you have never heard that word, there is a reason. The Tanka, sometimes called Danjia, sometimes simply the boat people, were an ethnic minority in southern China whose origins may stretch back thousands of years to the ancient Baiwei peoples. They lived their entire lives on the water. They were born on boats, married on boats, raised families on boats, and died on boats. Chinese law classified them as a degraded caste. They were forbidden from living on shore, forbidden from taking the imperial examinations, forbidden from marrying land dwellers. The women did not bind their feet, not out of liberation, but because you cannot work the deck of a sampan in bound feet. And Tanka women worked. They hauled nets, they rowed ferries, they gutted fish with hands that never stopped moving. The Cantonese called them water vermin. Polite society pretended they did not exist. And among the Tanka, at the very bottom of a community already at the bottom, were the women of the flower boats. The flower boats, huating, were floating brothels moored along the Pearl River, and by the late 1700s, there were an estimated 7,500 of them in Canton alone. 7,500. They formed entire floating cities of their own, lashed together in vast clusters, lit by silk lanterns that turned the river red and gold at night. From a distance, foreign sailors thought them the most beautiful sight on the water. Closer, the picture changed. The flower boats were tiered, like Chinese society itself. The best boats catered to wealthy merchants and government officials, lacquered wood, private rooms, trained musicians, girls who could recite poetry and play the guzheng. The worst boats, the ones closest to the water, the ones where the lanterns were cheapest and the walls thinnest, served sailors and dock workers and anyone with a few copper coins. The girls on those boats were almost always tanka. They were called saltwater girls, xianshui mei, and they were considered so low that regular prostitutes looked down on them. Shi Xianggu worked on these boats. She was born around 1775, probably near Xinhui in Guangdong province. Whether she was a prostitute herself, a madam managing other women, or something in between, the historical sources disagree. What they agree on is that she was tanka, she was poor, and she spent her formative years in an environment that taught her skills no school would have offered. She learned to read people, their desires, their weaknesses, their lies. She learned that information was currency, that the man who whispered secrets to a woman in a flower boat at midnight would pay handsomely to keep those secrets quiet by morning. She learned negotiation, not the polite kind practiced in merchant houses, but the raw, transactional kind, where every interaction is a power exchange, and the person who shows need first loses. She watched powerful men, studied their habits, cataloged their vulnerabilities. She was not waiting for rescue. She was taking notes, and in 1801, a pirate walked into her life. His name was Zheng Yi, and he was not just any pirate. He was pirate royalty. His family had been raiding the South China coast for generations, tracing their lineage back to a 17th century buccaneer named Zheng Jian, who had served under the legendary Zheng Chenggong, known to the West as Koxinga, the man who drove the Dutch out of Taiwan. Piracy ran in Zheng Yi's blood, the way seamanship ran in the blood of every Tanka child born on the Pearl River. His father, Zheng Liancheng, was a pirate. His cousin, Zheng Qi, was a pirate. His younger brother, Zheng San, was a pirate. And Zheng Yi himself had spent years fighting as a privateer for the Qing Dynasty in Vietnam, raiding shipping under a quasi-legal commission that gave his plunder the thin veneer of legitimacy. When the Qing fell in 1802 and his cousin Zheng Qi was captured and executed by the victorious Nguyen forces, Zheng Yi absorbed the remnants of the fleet and sailed back to the Chinese coast with hundreds of ships and thousands of hardened fighters who had lost their patron and needed a new one. By 1801, Zheng Yi commanded roughly 200 junks under the banner of what would become the Red Flag Fleet. He was ambitious, charismatic, and violent, and he had a plan. He wanted to unite every pirate clan on the South China coast into a single confederation, a pirate empire that would control the most valuable shipping lanes in Asia. To do that, he needed alliances. He needed legitimacy. He needed a partner who understood politics as well as he understood warfare. He came to the flower boats looking for Shi Xianggu. Now, here is where the story makes its first extraordinary turn. Zheng Yi did not simply take her. This was a world where women were property, where a pirate captain could have anything he wanted by force. He asked. He proposed marriage. And she did not simply accept. She negotiated. Picture the scene. A pirate lord, scarred, sun-darkened, a man whose name made merchants along 500 miles of coastline lock their doors, sitting across from a flower boat woman in a room that smells of sandalwood and river water. And she is telling him her terms, not asking, telling. 50%. Not 50% of the loot, 50% of the command. Equal authority over the fleet, equal decision-making power. A formal contractual partnership in which she would control half of everything. Every ship, every man, every coin. Think about what this meant. This was 1801. In England, a married woman could not own property. Everything she had became her husband's the moment she said, "I do." In America, women would not vote for another 119 years. In China, women were expected to obey their fathers, then their husbands, then their sons. the three obediences that had governed female life for 2,000 years. And here was a Tanka woman, born into a caste that was barely considered human, with no family name, no inheritance, no powerful relatives, looking a pirate warlord in the eye and saying, "Half, or I walk away." And she got it. The marriage happened in 1801. And it worked. Not because of romance, though perhaps that played its part, but because Zheng Yi and Shi Xianggu were complementary forces, two halves of a machine that neither could operate alone. He was the military commander, the fighter, the man whose reputation for violence kept rivals at bay. She was the strategist, the administrator, the political mind who understood that a pirate fleet was not just an army. It was a business, a government, an economy, and it needed structure to survive. Together, they began the most ambitious project in the history of piracy. Over the next 4 years, Zheng Yi used a combination of kinship ties, military pressure, promises, and threats to bring the rival pirate clans of the South China coast under a single authority. Some came willingly, seeing the advantages of confederation. Others came at the point of a sword. Some were absorbed after their leaders were killed or captured. Fleet by fleet, clan by clan, the confederation grew. In July of 1805, they formalized it. An agreement was signed, an actual written treaty between pirate leaders that united 6 fleets under a single command structure. Each fleet was identified by the color of its flag. The red flag fleet, their fleet, was the largest and the flagship of the confederation. The black flag fleet, commanded by the notorious Quo Po Tai, numbered roughly 100 ships. The blue flag fleet, under Wu Shi, was the second largest at over 160 ships. The white flag fleet, led by Liang Pao, was smaller and usually sailed in consort with the red flag. The green flag fleet belonged to Li Shangqing, and the yellow flag fleet was commanded by Tong Hai Pa. 6 fleets, 6 colors, 1 confederation. By the time the ink dried on that agreement, the combined force numbered approximately 400 junks and between 40,000 and 70,000 pirates. They controlled the shipping lanes of the entire South China Sea, from the coast of Vietnam to the waters near the Philippines. Every merchant vessel, every fishing boat, every cargo junk that sailed those waters either paid tribute or faced destruction. And then, on November 16th, 1807, the man who built it all was gone. Zheng Yi was in Vietnamese waters when it happened. The official account says a typhoon struck and he was swept overboard. He was 42 years old. But the official account is not the only account. Some historians believe he was killed fighting in Vietnam. Others suggest something darker, that a convenient storm has a way of arriving when powerful men have too many enemies. When an adopted son is ambitious, and a wife has spent 6 years learning every mechanism of power from the inside. The truth is lost to the South China Sea, which keeps its secrets better than any court of law. What is certain is this: one day, Zheng Yi commanded the largest pirate confederation in history, and the next day, he was dead, and the confederation had no leader. Or rather, it had no male leader. What happened next should have been impossible. A pirate fleet was a world of men, of violence, hierarchy, and a chain of command held together by fear and respect. The captains of the 5 other fleets were warriors who had clawed their way to power through combat, cunning, and murder. Not one of them had any reason to take orders from a widow. In the logic of piracy, Zheng Yi's death should have triggered a war of succession that would have shattered the confederation into 6 rival factions within a week. Shi Xianggu did not give them a week. She did not give them a day. She understood a principle that most people learn too late. In a power vacuum, the person who moves first wins. Not the strongest, not the most qualified, the fastest. Within days of her husband's death, possibly within hours, she had secured 2 critical alliances. The first was with the most powerful members of the Zheng family, the relatives and clan elders whose support gave any successor the legitimacy of bloodline. The second was with a young man named Cheng Po Sai. Cheng Po Sai is one of the most complex figures in this story. He had been a fisherman's son, a Tonka boy captured by Zheng Yi's fleet around 1798 when he was roughly 15 years old. Zheng Yi had seen something in the boy. Intelligence, ferocity, charisma, something. And rather than selling him or putting him to work as a deckhand, he adopted him. Formal adoption. A legal son, with all the rights and expectations that entailed. In Chinese culture, adopting a protege as an heir was common practice, a way to cement loyalty, create dynasty, and ensure succession. But there was more to it than that. Historical sources, delicately, as was the custom of the time, suggest that the relationship between Zheng Yi and Cheng Po Cai was not merely paternal. In the world of South China piracy, relationships between men were documented and apparently accepted without the stigma they carried in European or Confucian society. Whatever the precise nature of their bond, it produced a young man who was, by 1807, one of the most formidable fighters and most charismatic leaders in the entire confederation. He was loyal to the Zheng family name, and that loyalty was exactly what Shi Xianggu needed. She made Cheng Po Cai the military commander of the Red Flag Fleet. He would lead the battles, command the ships, stand at the prow with a sword. She would lead everything else: the strategy, the finances, the alliances, the code of law, the intelligence network, the political negotiations that held 6 rival fleets together. It was the same division of labor that had worked with her husband, but now she held the senior position. The other fleet commanders tested the waters. Some grumbled, some postured, some made tentative moves toward independence. She crushed the tests before they became challenges. She was too fast, too prepared, too deeply embedded in the political fabric of the Confederation for anyone to unpick her authority without unraveling the whole structure. And then she took a step that changed the nature of piracy forever. She wrote a code of law. Not guidelines, not suggestions, not the informal pirate articles that Western buccaneers scrawled on parchment and promptly ignored when it suited them. A constitution. A body of law posted on every ship in the fleet, read aloud to every new recruit, and enforced with a consistency that would have impressed a Prussian field marshal. The rules were simple. The punishments were not. Rule 1. Any pirate who gave unauthorized orders, who launched an attack, changed course, or made a tactical decision without approval from the command was beheaded. On the spot. No trial, no appeal, no extenuating circumstances. Your head left your shoulders and your body went over the side. This was not cruelty for its own sake. This was the foundation of a military hierarchy. In a fleet of 1,800 ships spread across thousands of square miles of ocean, the only thing preventing chaos was the absolute certainty that orders from the top would be obeyed. Rule 2. All captured loot, every coin, every bolt of silk, every chest of opium, every bar of silver, belonged to the fleet first. It was presented for inspection and registration. 80% went into the communal treasury, a central fund managed by Shi Xianggu and her administrators. 20% went to the ship that had taken it. Stealing from the communal fund was punishable by death. And the first infraction for hiding loot was not death. It was a severe beating, a public humiliation designed to serve as warning. The second infraction was death. This system did 2 things simultaneously. It ensured that wealth was distributed in a way that kept every ship invested in the Confederation's success. And it gave every pirate a direct financial incentive to police his shipmates. Rule 3. Desertion. Leave your post, abandon your ship, or flee from battle, and they cut your ears off. Both of them. That was for the first offense. They wanted you alive, walking through port towns as a living advertisement, a man with 2 raw wounds on the sides of his head that screamed to every sailor in every harbor, "This is what happens when you run." The second offense was death. Rule 4. And this was the rule that set Shi Xianggu's code apart from every other pirate code in history. Any pirate who raped a captive was beheaded. No exceptions, no excuses. No appeals to the heat of battle or the chaos of boarding. If a pirate wished to take a female captive as a wife, he could do so, but only with her consent, and only with the formal permission of the fleet command, and only if he swore to be faithful to her. Marital infidelity, once that commitment was made, was also punishable by death. Captives who were purchased had to be registered, and if a pirate took a captive and then did not wish to marry her, she was to be released unharmed. This was not feminism. Let us be clear about that. This was discipline. A fleet of 80,000 men, many of them violent criminals who had been recruited from the dregs of coastal society, could not function if its members were committing atrocities at random. Atrocities provoke retaliation. They unite enemies. They turn neutral parties into hostile ones. And they destroy internal cohesion, because a crew that cannot trust its own members is a crew that will mutiny at the first sign of pressure. Shi Xianggu understood all of this. The code was not moral. It was functional. And it worked. Rule 5. Any town or village that had agreed to supply the Confederation with food, water, intelligence, or safe harbor was under the fleet's protection. Looting a cooperative village was punishable by death. This turned the Pirate Confederation into something that resembled a feudal government more than a criminal gang. Coastal communities paid tribute in exchange for protection. Shi Xianggu's agents set up financial offices in every major town along the coast, from Canton to Macau and beyond, collecting fees from fishermen and merchants, selling official documents, essentially passports, that exempted the holder from pirate attack. Ships with a pirate passport could sail freely. Ships without one were prey. The system was so effective, so comprehensive, so ruthlessly organized, that historians have struggled to find a comparison. It was not just piracy. It was a parallel government, operating alongside the Qing Empire, with its own tax system, its own courts, its own bureaucracy, and its own monopoly on violence. And at the top of it all, making every decision that mattered, was a woman who had started her career on a flower boat. But what good is a government that cannot defend itself? This is where the story turns from extraordinary to almost unbelievable. The Qing Dynasty, the ruling power of an empire that stretched from Manchuria to Tibet, from the Gobi Desert to the South China Sea, had been watching the Pirate Confederation with growing alarm. By 1808, the situation had become intolerable. The pirates were not merely raiding ships. They were controlling entire stretches of coastline, levying taxes on the emperor's own subjects, and making the imperial navy look impotent. The governor-general of Guangdong received orders from Beijing: destroy the pirates. In the summer of 1808, a Qing naval force was assembled and sent to engage the Red Flag Fleet. The details of what followed vary by source, but the outcome does not. Near the coast, possibly around Mazu Island, the imperial fleet, roughly 35 warships, encountered the Pirate Confederation. And Shi Xianggu did not run. She did not scatter her fleet and retreat to open water, which would have been the rational choice for an outgunned force. She sailed directly toward the imperial ships. Picture it. The Qing warships coming down the coast in formation, their banners snapping, their cannon ports open, their officers confident that a show of imperial force would scatter these water bandits like sparrows. And then, emerging from every inlet and island channel, the red pennants. Hundreds of them, war junks with painted eyes on their bows and iron cannons lashed to their foredecks, crewed by men who had been fighting on the water since childhood. The pirates closed from multiple directions simultaneously, using the shallow coastal waters where they knew every reef and sandbar to outmaneuver the larger government ships. The battle was savage and short. When the smoke cleared, the Qing fleet was broken. Roughly half of the imperial ships were burning, sunk, or captured. The survivors fled upriver. The pirates collected the floating wreckage, salvaged the cannons, and added the captured vessels to their fleet. The Qing government was humiliated. An empire of 300 million people could not defeat a fleet of outlaws led by a woman. They tried again. In March of 1809, provincial commander Sun Tranmo assembled a fleet of over 100 government ships and attacked the pirates near the Dawanshan Islands. The result was the same: a catastrophe. Sun's fleet was shattered, ships sunk, captured, scattered. The government commanders who survived wrote desperate reports to Beijing, each one more alarming than the last. The pirates were not weakening. They were getting stronger. Every battle they won gave them more ships, more cannons, more men, and more confidence. The empire that had conquered China, that ruled the most populous nation on earth, was losing to a woman from a flower boat. And so the Qing did what desperate governments have always done throughout history. They called for foreign help. The Portuguese controlled the colony of Macau, 60 miles downstream from Canton, and they had their own reasons to fight the pirates. Ching Shih's fleet had been raiding Portuguese shipping, and in September of 1809, the pirates captured a brig belonging to the Portuguese governor of Timor, an insult that demanded a response. A Portuguese naval force under Captain José Pinto Alcoforado de Azevedo e Souza was dispatched from Macau. These were European warships, proper frigates and brigs with disciplined crews, superior gunnery, and officers trained in the traditions of Trafalgar and the Napoleonic Wars. On September 15, 1809, the Portuguese fleet, with 39 artillery pieces, engaged the pirates in the waters near Macau. The fighting was intense. The Portuguese managed to force the pirate ships to scatter, the first real defeat the Red Flag Fleet had suffered. But Cheng Po Sai regrouped. He came back. On November 29th, the two fleets clashed again for 9 hours. The pirates retreated, regrouped, counterattacked, and were repulsed again. On December 11th, Cheng Shih moved his entire fleet toward Macau, divided into 3 attack groups. A bold frontal assault that tested the Portuguese defenses to their limit. The pirates lost 15 ships, but did not break. They withdrew in good order, patched their holes, replenished their powder, and remained a fighting force. The Portuguese had won battles. They had not won the war. The Red Flag fleet was damaged but intact. 1,800 ships cannot be destroyed by 6 frigates, no matter how good the gunnery. The Portuguese had scratched the surface. The ocean beneath was still red. And then there were the British. The East India Company, the corporation that would one day conquer India, that already controlled much of the trade between Europe and Asia, found itself in an impossible position. Its ships sailed through waters that Ching Shih owned. Every cargo vessel, every tea clipper, every opium runner that entered or left Canton was vulnerable. The company had a navy. It had resources. It had the most powerful maritime nation on earth behind it. And yet, in 1809, the East India Company sat down with Ching Shih's representatives and negotiated a truce. The terms were straightforward. British cargo would travel unharmed. The pirates would leave company ships alone. Both parties exchanged gifts and pleasantries. Think about what that means. The British Empire, the force that would soon rule a quarter of the globe, the power that had smashed the French at Trafalgar 4 years earlier, looked at this pirate fleet and decided that negotiation was safer than war. 3 national navies, the Qing Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the British Empire, 3 of the most powerful military forces of the 19th century, and 1 woman held them all at bay. But Shi Shanggu was not just a warrior, and she was not just an administrator. She was a strategist who understood something that nearly every powerful person in history has failed to grasp. You cannot win forever. The tide always turns. Navies get bigger. Alliances shift. Ammunition runs out. Internal rivalries fester. Every pirate empire in history, every single one, had ended the same way. Violently, suddenly, and usually with the leader's head on a spike. Edward Teach was shot and beheaded, and his severed head hung from the bowsprit of a British sloop. Bartholomew Roberts took a grape shot to the throat, and his crew threw his body overboard before the British could take it as a trophy. Henry Every stole the greatest treasure in the history of piracy, and probably died penniless in a doorway in Devon. Calico Jack Rackham was hanged at Port Royal, and his body displayed in an iron cage as a warning. The sea devours everyone. No exceptions, unless you leave first. By 1809, Shi Shanggu could see the cracks forming. The Portuguese victories had inflicted real damage. Not enough to destroy the fleet, but enough to shake the aura of invincibility that held the Confederation together. More dangerous than the Portuguese was the poison working from within. Quo Po Tai, the commander of the Black Flag fleet, had grown jealous of Cheng Shih. He resented the young man's closeness to Shi Shanggu, resented taking orders from a former captive turned commander, resented the entire power structure that placed the Red Flag fleet above his own. When Cheng Shih's ships were engaged in battle near the coast, Quo Po Tai, who was close enough to intervene, refused to come to his aid. He watched the Red Flag fleet fight alone and did nothing. The betrayal was a signal. If one fleet commander could refuse orders without consequence, the Confederation's unity was a fiction. And Shi Shanggu, who had built her empire on discipline and the absolute enforcement of rules, knew that a fiction left unchallenged becomes a precedent. She also knew that a war between the Red and Black Flag fleets would destroy the Confederation from within and deliver what the Qing, the Portuguese, and the British had failed to achieve. And then the worst happened. Quo Po Tai defected. He took his 100 ships and his thousands of men and surrendered to the Qing government in exchange for a full pardon and a commission as a naval officer. Overnight, the same man who had commanded a fleet under Ching Shih's authority was now hunting pirates for the emperor. The Confederation had lost a sixth of its strength, and the man who left had intimate knowledge of every route, every safe harbor, every signal, every weakness. Shi Shanggu had perhaps months before the whole structure collapsed. Some leaders would have fought to the end, would have gone down with the ship in a blaze of defiant glory. She was not that kind of leader. She had never been that kind of leader. She was the kind who won. And so, in early 1810, she made the most audacious move of her career. She surrendered. No, that is the wrong word. She negotiated. And the way she did it was a masterpiece of political theater that deserves to be studied in every diplomatic academy on earth. The initial approach was made through intermediaries. The Qing Governor-General of Guangdong, a man named Bai Ling, received word that the pirate queen was willing to discuss terms. Bai Ling was interested. Of course he was interested. He had been trying to destroy her fleet for 2 years and had failed, but cautious. The first rounds of negotiation broke down. Shi Xianggu and Cheng Po-sai demanded the right to retain 5,000 subordinates and 80 ships, along with permission to enter the lucrative salt trade. Bai Ling refused. The talks stalled. And then, on April 17, 1810, Shi Xianggu did something that no one expected. Picture the scene. The Yamen, the government administrative office in Canton. A grand building of timber and tile, guarded by imperial soldiers, the seat of Qing authority in southern China. And through the gate, walking calmly, without weapons, without bodyguards, without a single armed man at her side, comes the most wanted criminal in the Chinese Empire. She is accompanied by 17 women and their families, the wives and mothers of her pirates, people who pose no military threat, but whose presence sends an unmistakable message. She is not coming as a supplicant. She is coming as a head of state, with her people behind her. She walked into Bai Ling's office, she sat down, and she dictated terms, not requested, dictated. A woman who could neither read nor write when she began her career, negotiating face-to-face with a representative of the Emperor of China, and winning. The terms she extracted are staggering. Full pardons for 17,318 pirates. Not prison, not exile, not forced labor in the emperor's mines. Pardons. Her people could walk free, return to their families, live as civilians with clean records. The pirates surrendered 226 ships, 1,315 cannons, and 2,798 assorted weapons. But, and this is the part that defies belief, they kept the money. Every coin, every jewel, every bar of silver, every chest of opium, every bolt of silk they had plundered across nearly a decade of piracy on the South China Sea. The Qing government, the same government whose navy she had annihilated, whose authority she had humiliated, whose coastal provinces she had taxed as though they were her own, agreed to let the pirates walk away with all of it. Cheng Po-sai received the commission as a lieutenant in the Qing Imperial Navy. The same man who had been sinking government ships a month ago was now an officer in the emperor's service, commanding a pirate-hunting fleet and drawing a government salary. Shi Xianggu retained a personal fleet of 24 ships for her own use, and she received something that was, in its own way, even more remarkable: official permission to marry Cheng Po-sai. In Qing China, a widow remarrying was deeply frowned upon, legally complicated, and socially disgraced. The government waived all of it. They gave her everything she asked for, because the alternative was another 2 years of war they could not win. On April 20th, 1810, Shi Xianggu and Cheng Po-sai formally surrendered near Farangsha. It was the greatest exit strategy in the history of organized crime. Not just piracy, all of it. No drug lord, no mob boss, no outlaw of any era, in any country, has ever negotiated a deal this good and lived to enjoy it. And she did enjoy it. After the amnesty, Shi Xianggu settled in Canton with Cheng Po-sai, now officially her husband. She was barely 35 years old. Most people at 35 have not yet hit their stride. She had already commanded the largest pirate fleet in history, defeated 3 national navies, and negotiated a peace treaty with an empire. What do you do for an encore? She opened a gambling house, and it became one of the most successful establishments in Canton, a city that knew a thing or two about gambling. Some accounts say she also ran a smuggling operation on the side, dealing in the same opium and salt that had filled her pirate coffers. Other sources suggest she maintained an informal intelligence network, selling information to merchants and government officials who were willing to pay for the kind of knowledge that only a former pirate queen could possess. Old instincts, it seems, do not die quietly. Cheng Po-sai served the Qing Navy faithfully for years, hunting the remnants of the very pirate confederation he had once commanded. There is an irony in that. a former pirate hunting pirates, but there is also a kind of logic. He knew their routes, their signals, their hiding places. He knew them because he had been one of them. He died relatively young, though the exact date and circumstances are disputed. Some say he continued to serve until his death. Others say he retired alongside his wife, but Shi Shanggu outlived them all. She died in 1844, approximately 69 years old, in her own home, in her own bed, in the city where she had once been a nameless Tonka woman on a flower boat. She died wealthy. She died free. She died without a single day spent in prison, without a single scar from a hangman's noose, without a single enemy left who had the power to touch her. A Tonka woman, a saltwater girl, a flower boat worker, a pirate queen, a businesswoman, a grandmother, most likely, free and wealthy and old and done on her own terms to the very end. Let that settle for a moment. Because in the golden age of piracy, hundreds of pirates became legends. Their names echo through popular culture. Blackbeard, Calico Jack, Bartholomew Roberts, Anne Bonny, Henry Every. Novels have been written about them. Films have been made. Theme parks have been built. And every single one of them ended the same way. Violently, tragically, usually young. The sea devoured them all. All except one. In 2007, a film called Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End featured a character named Mistress Ching, played by Takayo Fisher. She appeared on screen for barely a minute. A pirate lord, sitting among other pirate lords, speaking a few lines in a council of war. Most audiences did not know who she was. Most audiences did not know that the real woman behind that brief, forgettable cameo commanded more ships than the Spanish Armada, wrote a legal code more effective than most national constitutions, defeated 3 empires, and retired to die old and rich in her own bed, while every other pirate lord in that fictional council would have envied her real life beyond imagining. Hollywood gave her a cameo. History owed her a throne. There is something in the story of Ching Shih that goes far beyond adventure, beyond piracy, beyond the romance of the high seas and the clash of wooden ships. She understood a truth that eludes almost every person who acquires power. It is not about how much you can take. It is about knowing when to stop. Every empire falls. Every army meets its match. Every outlaw kingdom crumbles. The people who build them almost never get to choose how they end. They ride the wave until the wave crashes. And the wave always crashes. And they are always surprised. She was never surprised. She saw the wave forming before anyone else. She wrote it perfectly. And she stepped off at the exact moment, not a month too early, not a week too late, when stepping off was still possible. The South China Sea is still there. Container ships cross it every day now, carrying electronics and clothing and automobile parts along routes that have not changed in centuries, following the same monsoon winds that filled the sails of 1,800 red-flagged junks. The Pearl River still empties into it, brown and wide and indifferent. The flower boats are gone. The Tonka communities have mostly dispersed into the vast anonymity of modern Chinese cities. Macau is a casino strip. Canton is Guangzhou, a megacity of 15 million people where nobody remembers the floating brothels or the saltwater girls or the pirate queen who rose from their midst to hold the world at sword point. But the story remains, and it asks a question that has no comfortable answer. If the lowest woman in the lowest caste of the largest empire on earth could do what she did, if she could see the world clearly enough, move fast enough, think ruthlessly enough to bend history around her will, then what is stopping the rest of us? What excuse do we have? She had nothing. No education, no family name, no inheritance, no rights, no law that protected her, no tradition that supported her. She had nothing but her mind and her nerve and the absolute refusal to accept the life the world had assigned her. And she won. Not partially, not briefly, completely, permanently. The only pirate in history who did. 330 years of piracy on the world's oceans, from the buccaneers of the Caribbean to the corsairs of the Barbary Coast to the raiders of the Straits of Malacca. Thousands of pirates, hundreds of captains, dozens of legends. And in all that history, across all those oceans, only one of them, only one, died old, free, and rich in a bed of their own choosing, having beaten every enemy and outlived every rival and kept every coin. She started life as a saltwater girl on a flower boat in Canton. She ended it as the most successful pirate who ever lived. The sea remembers nothing, but we remember her. Now, if this story lit something in you, if you felt the cannon smoke and the monsoon wind and the sheer impossible audacity of a flower boat woman dictating terms to an empire, do a dead pirate queen a favor and subscribe to Tales of the High Seas. Because if you do not, the ghost of Ching Shih will personally audit your household finances, impose an 80% communal tax on your refrigerator contents, cut both your ears off for desertion from this channel, and have Chung Po Tsai chase you up and down the Pearl River until you comply. She has the code, she has the paperwork, and she has never, not once, made an empty threat.